And there we go, everyone. We are back again for another fantastic conversation on Friday Night Counterattack. We are here with another very special guest and a very special feature episode again today, mostly because I am drowning in assignments and work, and I need someone who's good at writing. I need someone who's good at presenting. I need someone who's good at looking like is very organized as well, which is great to see as well. So I needed someone who's going to help me a bit with that along the way, but also someone who's very popular in the sports media industry and in the football media industry as well. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Ben Jacobs, my special guest for today. Ben, how are you doing today? And would you like to let the listeners know a bit more about yourself before we crack on with it?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Ben Jacobs, sports broadcaster and writer. I spent my last staff gig at CBS. I'm now with TalkSport as a Premier League commentator and also their Saudi Pro League correspondent. That was a big story last summer with 94 foreign transfers, including some really big ones like Karim Benzema and Neymar. So I spend a lot of my time in transfer spaces, drinking a lot of coffee, staying up all night, talking to agents or players or clubs to try and get some exclusive scoops. And I think that more recently, in the last few months, a big story for me has also been covering the Manchester United takeover. So I'm certainly not short of things to do.
Nah, it's good to hear that. And it's good to have you on the podcast today, Ben. And me being a Man United fan, this is something that I wanted to really hear from you about as well, because again, with this podcast, there's so much to talk about in terms of your career in football media, in terms of your team of the year, which we'll get to later on, which will be great fun as well. And of course, I need to get a few nitty gritty questions out the way for myself as well. So first things first, you did mention about being part of the exclusive news that you brought to us a couple of weeks ago regarding the Qatar ownership not really going ahead for Manchester United, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe actually being one who's going forward with a 25% ownership stake at Manchester United. I wanted to hear from you just a bit more about how that's kind of progressed over the last couple of weeks, and are we going to see that move actually happen this season, or is it going to be a slow burner as everything tends to be at Manchester United?
Well, I know that by the time this goes out, something may have moved, because that is the sort of state we're at the moment with the Manchester United sale process. So Jim Ratcliffe is hoping at the time of recording, which is late October, that in the coming weeks, he'll be able to finalize a deal. Then you've got the completion process, and that can take some time. And the thing about a company listed on the New York Stock Exchange is the protocol will dictate that any deal has to be 100% done before it can be formally announced. But several sources intimate that it's a case of when, not if, as far as Sir Jim Ratcliffe is concerned. And I think that's partially why Sheikh Jassim pulled out when he did, because although there was a fatigue with the process and there was some skepticism maybe that the Glazers as a six wanted to sell, ultimately you pull out before you're rejected, and you pull out because perhaps you get wind that your rival is very close. So for the last 10 weeks, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has kind of pivoted from wanting a majority and controlling stake right now to 25% with an eventual path to control. And there's an agreement of principle of sorts over the 25% in terms of the stake and its corresponding valuation. And now it's a case of all of the other legalities and conversations, particularly around what sporting control and instant sporting control looks like. So there's work to be done, but there's no real panic on the Ratcliffe side that he's going to hit roadblocks. It's more about just ironing out the details before finally this sale process comes to a close. And the plan from Ineos Sports perspective is to try and get this one fully done, all of the different aspects, whether that's the negotiations, a board vote, an announcement, the completion process, every aspect Ratcliffe wants to be done so he can have his 25% stake in time to have some kind of say or influence over the January transfer window.
Yeah, because with Sir Jim Ratcliffe as well, he's obviously the owner of DAZN Sport, and Ineos have that controlling stake in DAZN Sport in Switzerland, and they've also been owners of Nice as well, and they're only slightly getting better and better every season. But they had a public outcry last season where Dante, the former Bayern Munich centre back, called out the ownership model that they had as well. And I just wanted to kind of know from a Man United perspective as well, what can we expect as Man United fans from Sir Jim Ratcliffe's perspective as a potential owner, and potentially the full owner with years to come as well? Because as everyone knows, that's how the Glazers got their hands on Manchester United, by partially buying lots and lots of stock and having a minority stake and then building up to it. Could we see Sir Jim Ratcliffe do the same over a number of years at Manchester United?
Well, that's always what sources within the Ineos camp have said, that this is about control. It's not about buying a small piece and then sitting back. It's about ultimately controlling the football club. I don't think we'll see a scenario or a roadmap for 100% anytime soon. Ratcliffe has always intimated that he wants control, but almost control at the minimum possible price, which is effectively either buying 50.01% of the shares or all 69% of the Glazers shares. But I don't think that Ratcliffe has ever seen too much sense in immediately delisting the public shares to get to 100%, because if you can get control at 69%, then why pay that extra 1 point whatever billion to get to 100% when you can instead use that kind of amount to invest in the football club? And that's going to be the big question from Manchester United fans in this whole process. Ratcliffe buying a stake at one amount doesn't generate enough income to renovate Old Trafford and Carrington, to invest in the men and the women's team, and ultimately clear the debt. So there's definitely a question as to how capital is going to be raised. Ratcliffe could also, in addition to 25%, inject equity into the football club to get a slightly higher percentage of ownership, or he could just decide either instantly or over time to invest. And the other possibility, although Manchester United fans will raise their eyebrows, is that the Glazers use some or all of the money that Ratcliffe has invested to get his 25% stake, and they put that back into the club. But it's difficult, because if Ratcliffe's buying an equal percentage of A and B shares to get to his 25%, then some of the money won't be going to the Glazers. It will be going to other minority shareholders, and they obviously are going to take that money in return for selling their shares. So that money's not going to go back into the football club. So there's a fair amount of questions at the moment. Those questions may have been answered by the time people are listening to this, but there's a fair amount of questions about the specific structure on the Ratcliffe bid. And that's why this has taken time, and that's why Ratcliffe has been flexible. But in terms of eventual path to control, it is believed that that is what Ratcliffe wants. So the key question in all of this is going to be, is there an option for majority and control for Ratcliffe? Is there an obligation even? And if it's the latter, then Manchester United fans will know that at some point the Glazers are definitively leaving. If it's only an option, or if it's not there at all, then at that point there'll be a lot more backlash, because people will start to believe that the Glazers ran this whole process and they never really had any intention of selling. And that is a fair conclusion, but maybe they just didn't have the right offer. Maybe they just didn't have the right valuation. There was certainly less suitors than the Glazers were anticipating that have entered into this sale process. So it's been very complex. It's been difficult to cover. Caution has always been needed. And I think that the other thing is, if that point is true, that, as some may conclude, the Glazers never really wanted to sell 100% of the club, then that doesn't just apply to Sheikh Jassim, it also applies to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And therefore, maybe this 25% deal is actually the only way that Ratcliffe could have won, in inverted commas, the sale process. So this is why there's so many different complexities. And now we have to wait and see what the next step is. But Manchester United fans will want and deserve clarity as to the exact structure, so they understand, even if it's not right now, whether over time the Glazers are staying or going.
Yeah, it's true. It's one of those things that we've been waiting for a good number of years now. And the fact that they were open to negotiations within the last year or so, it's been a painstaking process as Man United fans are chanting every game at Old Trafford and away games as well, Glazers out. And it goes to show that we're nearly at the end of this whole rigmarole as Man United fans, and maybe we'll get some clarity next week. I'm not holding out for much, to be honest, because they say some things and it just doesn't happen, and it gets delayed and it happens again and again. And again, but hopefully, fingers crossed, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have some further clarity on Sir Jim Ratcliffe's new influence at Manchester United, which would be great as well. What's not so great is, obviously, on the day of recording, we will talk about it because I find it quite fascinating, is Newcastle United midfielder Sandro Tonali has now been banned officially for 10 months and is going to be part of a rehabilitation program as well, due to his betting allegations, and has been deemed guilty of that as well. I wanted to know your thoughts on how betting has become at the forefront at a lot of Premier League clubs as well. We've seen Ivan Toney suffer from it as well. We've seen Daniel Sturridge suffer from it as well. Sandro Tonali. I personally think that AC Milan knew about his betting allegations during the summer, and that's why they sold him off, and that's why they were happy to rid their hands of him as well. I just want to know your thoughts on it. I want to know your thoughts if AC Milan had any inside information beforehand, before selling him, and what does this kind of mean for the Premier League going forward? Because it looks like it's going to become, unfortunately, a lot more common for players to get having their hands tied with betting allegations as well. Let me hear your thoughts, Ben.
Yeah, there's no indication at the time of recording that AC Milan knew and then fobbed him off. And
no, it's just my theory. It's just my theory. I'm speculating here.
So some people will have a theory, isn't it? It's a valid question to ask for sure. Did Milan know when they sold to Newcastle? But Newcastle had to pay above the odds for phenomenal talent to get the player. So I think it was a good bit of business all around. And obviously, it would be very atypical for any club to sell a player with knowledge of that kind of ban, knowing that he'd still be back after the ban anyway, because Tonali is very young. So I think that this problem that football has with gambling is one aspect. And then we have the specifics of Tonali. So we can come back to the bigger picture in a moment. But with Sandro Tonali, the first thing we have to point out is that via his agent, he's admitted that he unfortunately has a gambling addiction, and that should be taken very seriously. And his welfare is of high priority in all of this. And because of the gambling addiction and because he's cooperated with the Italian authorities, a possible maximum ban for betting breaches of 3 years is down to 10 months. It does mean that he'll miss the rest of the season. It does mean that he'll also miss Euro 2024. So it's a big setback, but more important than that is that he rehabilitates and gets better, and that his welfare is considered. And then I'm sure that he'll come back stronger. And Newcastle now need to determine whether they try and replace him in the short to medium term in January. Scott McTominay, long-term target, could be one to watch. Calvin Phillips may need game time with a view to Euro 2024. But at this stage, there's nothing concrete because Newcastle were a little bit blindsided by this. So it's not like they've got a list of ready-made replacements. And the challenge with Tonali is that he's like a hybrid player. He's a number 8, really, but he can also play number 6. So that makes it even harder to find the perfect kind of profile to come in and replace him. But in essence, we have to think about player welfare. And it's obvious that certain players, statistically, when there's thousands of footballers out there, are going to get sucked into gambling and do so because it's everywhere in sport at the moment, which is why the Premier League will finally take off gambling sponsors from front of shirt. But we're still going to see gambling adverts. We're still going to see gambling sponsors that are not front of shirt. We're still going to see in-play betting, and footballers have got a lot of time on their hands. They're young. It's an easy thing to do on your phone. A lot of money
as well to use.
A lot of money that they can put down. And remember that not every gambling breach is part of some sort of conspiracy or part of some kind of match fixing. It doesn't always have a dark side. Sometimes a footballer might be bored and they might play legal online poker. Sometimes they might bet on a sport that isn't football with no kind of inside knowledge. So I think that sometimes people think, and in the case of Tonali, they asked the question, the presumption becomes they must have bet on their team. They must have bet with inside knowledge. And I don't think it's always like that. I think that we're just in a situation now in football where gambling is everywhere. Footballers are rich. They've got a lot of time on their hands. It's very easy to develop that kind of addiction. And it's very easy as well, I think, to not think it's an addiction. And maybe the richer you are, the more money comes in. It's a weekly wage. You keep putting down money. You keep occupying the time. You keep getting a buzz from it. One day you realize it's unhealthy. And a lot of footballers say that. And a lot of footballers also say that they retire and then they get into gambling. And that becomes a problem as well. So it's a sort of never-ending cycle. And we have to find a way to break it. And I think as far as the Premier League are concerned, removing front of shirt gambling sponsorship is one step, but we have to educate, we have to look after players' welfare. And when it becomes an illegal form of gambling, either because it's an illegal bookie, which we've seen in Italy, or because it's illegal because you effectively have inside knowledge or you might be match fixing, that's when we need to make sure that the punishments are deterrents. And in the case of Tonali, even though, as I said right at the start, welfare is the most important thing, the length of punishment is very beneficial as well, because it shows every other footballer that might consider betting and might not know they've got a problem. If they do it and they cross the line and it's a breach of the rules, then ultimately you could be out for the entire season. I think the last thing I'd say is that I'm really pleased with the Tonali situation, that he's allowed to still train with the football club, because Ivan Toney was not afforded that privilege. And if you're going to ban a footballer from playing, fine, but still the club they're a part of has a huge role to play in the rehabilitation, as does football. So let the player train, let the player still be part of the football family, let the player still feel part of the football club. Ban them from the game, fine. That's the punishment. If they are found guilty, that's the right thing to do, and make the ban appropriate, which is why with Tonali, it's come down from 3 years to 10 months. But if you shun them from the entire football club, if you don't let them train, then one, when they return from 10 months, it's not a 10-month ban. It's probably more like a 14-month ban, because they've got to go through an entire pre-season. And two, they've lost touch with their football club. They're not seen every day. They're not looked after every day. Their mental welfare suffers. Their football sharpness suffers. So I think this is the right approach. The banners in the end become the right length because Tonali's cooperated, and the way this has been handled by the Italian Football Federation, by Tonali and his lawyers, and by Newcastle United, I think is an extremely sensible approach. And if we could go back and do the Toney ban again, it should have been done in the same way, and Toney shouldn't have been shunned from training with Brentford for so long.
Yeah, because with my point of view, I have a different point of view completely, in terms of, or a different question for you as well to discuss before we move on to our next topic, is why is it that betting bans are longer than racial abuse bans? I really don't get that personally, because we've seen that in the Premier League when they're only 3 games, 4 games, they're inconclusive. Some of them are just not long as they should be, really. And then you're seeing someone, for example, betting, which again, it feels like a victimless crime from the outside perspective, but that's what I want to kind of know from your point of view. Like, who does it really hurt? Does it hurt the authorities? Does it hurt the club, compared to actual racist abuse that we've seen previously as well? So just from that perspective, can you explain that a bit more to myself, Ben, just so I'm aware of why there's such a big difference in bans between racial abuse and betting in football?
Yeah, I think you make a very valid point, and I think a lot of people listening will agree with it. I think the only difference is that betting is black and white, in the sense that if you place a bet, there's an electronic record potentially of that bet, or maybe you've just accepted that you've done the bet. And in the context of this ban, it's there as a deterrent, because the harm can be done to the integrity of the game. And as a consequence, if you place an illegal bet, you might, in some cases, not with Tonali, although he did bet on Milan, but you might be part of match fixing. You might be able to influence the game, or you might have inside knowledge. So with Tonali betting on Milan, he wasn't playing in those games, so he couldn't have influenced those games. But was he aware from training of who was in better form? Was he aware in training of who might be in the starting 11? So then if he bets on Milan to win, then you could argue he's not trying to fix anything. He's not trying to influence anything. He's not on the pitch to throw the game or win it for them, but he might have some inside knowledge. And because the betting is more black and white, and there may be records that are completely provable, the ban is there and it's lengthy and it's a deterrent. I think with racial abuse, the challenge, wrongly so, because it's abhorrent and we need to stand up to it, and we need the worst imaginable deterrents to stop people doing it. But until we get in a position where we can record footballers, where we can have more cameras, where we can prove it categorically, there's always that danger that somebody alleges racial abuse, somebody denies racial abuse, and then annoyingly, we're in a position where the authorities are not able to put that 10-month ban or longer in place to allow for an equal punishment to betting. And I think that where we will get to first is not footballers and racial abuse, but fans and racial abuse. And we will get the bans even longer than 10 months because we do have cameras in the stadiums. We do have witnesses in the stadiums. We do have people, stewards, fellow fans that are willing to speak out. So as we get to a point with racial abuse or any kind of abuse where we're whistleblowing, where we're calling it out, where we can use lip readers, where we can use cameras that are on fans, when they start getting life bans, which is obviously significantly worse than 10 months for Tonali, then that can be replicated into the playing side of the game, and players can be educated and can be aware that if they do the same as a fan does in the stand and make a disgraceful, offensive gesture, that they are also going to get the same punishment. So if a fan is banned for life, then why shouldn't a player be banned for life if they are going to choose to react in that manner? And you can make that argument, but I think it's just that when you place a bet, it's a monetary transaction. There's likely to be a physical record. You're likely to be asked about that. You're going to be called to account. It's more black and white. If you get a footballer racially abusing another footballer, then if there's any hearsay, if there's any he said, she said, so to speak, then it's a lot harder to slap a career ending or career stagnating punishment if there is that denial and there's not that evidence. So hopefully we just get to a position where, much like with the betting, we do have more technology that can look at everyone, managers, coaches, footballers, fans, and then any form of abuse, racial or otherwise, will be black and white. And if it's black and white, there is zero reason why the punishment shouldn't be equivalent or worse to the length of the betting ones, because we can be more categorical about proving it. But I think that's why, for footballers anyway, a ban for racial abuse is less than a ban for betting, because the opportunity to categorically prove the betting aspect is maybe easier at this stage with the tools available to us.
Yeah, it's one of those things, because just like last week at the time of recording, when Sevilla played Real Madrid, and you saw quite clearly a fan racially abusing Vinicius Jr. It's not the first time it's happened in Spain as well. And me personally, if I had the opportunity, I'd give every team who has a racist fan in the crowd a 12-point deduction, really. Simple as that. They need to educate their fans a lot more. They can educate their players a lot more as well. And if it doesn't mean that they have life bans as well, it shows that it's actually hurting the team where it hurts them the most, on the league table, where it always does, which needs to be done, because Everton could be linked with a 12-point ban deduction as well due to their financial issues as well, which we won't get into, because that's enough serious talk.
It's just dicey though, because it then comes down to, and again, it doesn't come down to this with the player in a bet. If you use your example, it then comes down to the integrity of the fan, and how do you prove that they're a fan of the team? What's to stop me putting on a Manchester City shirt, saying I'm a Manchester City fan, going into the Manchester City end, because I know that if I'm on rows A to C, I'll be seen on camera abusing a footballer. And I know that if, to use your example, it comes with a 12-point deduction, I can intentionally pretend to be a fan, abuse somebody, and get the team punished. And I think this is where clubs want a bit more clarity. Another good example, we're not talking about abuse here, and actually it's an example to many of football fans showing their voice, but we saw in the Champions League, in the build-up to the Celtic Atletico game, the authorities in Celtic Football Club telling their fans not to come in with any Palestinian or Israeli flags. And Celtic's so-called Green Brigade said, thanks for the warning, we're still going to bring in thousands of Palestine flags because we feel that it's important to make a stance and show solidarity with the Palestinian people. Now Celtic are going to get a fine for that. And without getting into the politics, the point here I'm making is that Celtic have done everything possible under the UEFA rules to make their point and to make it clear to their fan base that they will be fined if the fan base go against the advice. And yet Celtic are still going to, in likelihood, get a fine for that. And obviously people listening will say it's a fine worth taking, or that they believe the protest is worth far more than playing ball with their football club. And again, I won't get into the politics of that because it's a contentious issue and lots of people will have very different and diverse opinions. But that's an example of where the club have tried to do one thing and the fans have chosen to do another. Whether rightly or wrongly, Celtic will still pick up the bill for that. So again, it comes down to abuse. It comes down to any other topic here. If the club do everything in their power to educate, to prevent, to clamp down, to punish, we're not talking anymore about Celtic and Palestinian flags. We're back to abuse now in the point I'm making. But if the club do everything in their power and then one idiot still chooses to make a horrible gesture to an opposing player that personally abuses them, whether racially or otherwise, then the club can turn around and ban. But if the club were also to get a fine and a points deduction, the club could say, what more could we have possibly done? And I think this is, again, what makes it less black and white than in the example of one football player and illegal betting.
Yeah, it's just that psychological point of view as well. Like you mentioned about Sandro Tonali's mental health and how he's going to have to go through it through the next 10 months as well. It's more from that point of view of how does then Vinicius Jr., for example, deal with it after seeing a fan do that. We've seen Raheem Sterling go one-on-one with a fan almost at Chelsea Football Club, and now he plays for Chelsea Football Club as well, which goes to show that anything can happen. Fred's had it before at Manchester City, and it kind of just goes to show that, again, not much player welfare is being taken publicly, I would say, for players that have been racially abused in these big games, in these big televised games as well, compared to what we've seen other players being banned for as well. So, no, I like your points on that. It was really good to hear your thoughts on that, Ben. Nicely done. One more serious topic, then we'll get to your fun topics before we go into it. I need to hear about how you became kind of the voice of the Saudi Arabian League in Britain, I would say, because you've had an amazing career path as well. But I want to know a bit more about how you've appreciated learning football from different points of view, from different countries, and how that's kind of I'm going to be blunt. How it's kind of inspired our podcast as well, because we always talk about different European football all the time, which is great. We love learning about different players, especially different wonder kids from different parts of the world. It's like one of the players I really like talking about, El Yawahi and Santiago Jimenez. Both scored this week in the Champions League, which is great to see. And I'm really happy that they're doing quite well in the Champions League. But I kind of want to know your points of view in terms of how it is covering foreign leagues compared to how it was comparing English divisions as well, respectively.
Yeah, I think it just depends on what league you're covering. Some leagues have more access. Some leagues have different cultures and ways of doing things. Everyone perhaps presumes that the Premier League, because it's on our doorstep, is the biggest and the best league in the world. And that's correct, I think, statistically, but it comes with access that is diminished maybe or reserved for rights holders only. I was lucky because when I was at CBS, we were the Champions League rights holder. When I was at beIN Sports in Doha, we were the Premier League rights holder. So you do get a lot of access, but there's a lot more people around the league. You can go somewhere like Saudi Arabia and you can get a lot more access. I enjoy covering women's football because, again, the access is excellent. The players want their stories told. So you can tell more diverse stories, interesting stories, athlete-led stories, human interest stories, passion project type stories. And that's all very interesting as well. So I got into the Saudi League actually many years ago, long before last summer and the big spending. And part of the reason why I followed the Saudi Pro League in the past is because, as well as working in America and the UK, I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I mentioned that I was working for beIN Sports. I was in Doha, I was in Dubai, and covering a lot of the sport in the Middle East and North Africa. So I was going over to Saudi Arabia and some of the other big leagues in the Middle East and North Africa, a few trips over to Egypt as well. So I've always been familiar with the Saudi Pro League. And then in the last 6 months, I was appointed TalkSport's Saudi Pro League correspondent. So naturally, the job title tells you that I have to cover the Saudi Pro League or I wouldn't really be doing my job. And it was a good time to join. And partially the appointment was down to the flurry of business that we saw over last summer. And the Saudi Pro League now is very different to the Saudi Pro League that I covered when I was living in the Middle East and North Africa. The infrastructure is improving and the spending has gone through the roof as well. And the recruitment is to a large degree centralized as well, with Michael Emenalo, who used to be at Chelsea, kind of leading on that from a central or Ministry of Sport perspective. So it's a fascinating project. And naturally, the league is trying to become one of the top 10 in the world. over the course of the next few years. Maybe then a top 5. Maybe one day it will challenge the Premier League as well. But for now, it's about investing in stars. It's about investing in Saudi grassroots. It's about investing in women's sport as well. And therefore, your Benzemas, your Neymars, who joined over the summer, Firmino, Mane, Ronaldo, who obviously came a little bit earlier, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And for many, they'll only see the tip of the iceberg. So they'll think that Saudi Arabia is just all about big names and big spending. But beneath that tip, there's a lot of money being put on infrastructure. There's a new stadium being built for Steven Gerrard's Al Ittifaq. There's younger signings like Gabri Veiga. There's mid-20s signings like Ruben Neves, who could have gone anywhere in Europe, I think, and played Champions League football, but he chose to go to the Saudi Pro League. Yeah, money's a part of that, but they're also aware that if enough players go, and 94 foreign names moved in the last summer window, then the standard will improve very quickly. And once 1 or 2 go, it's a snowball effect. So Bobby Firmino and Sadio Mane said no originally, as did Neymar. But a few months after that first offer, they thought, actually, maybe we should go. And why? Because Benzema had gone and Kante had gone and a few others had gone. And they started to realize it was maybe less of a risk. And that's why people will look back at Ronaldo as the kind of pioneer, because he went when nobody else decided to. And some of that was down to the Manchester United fallout, and some of that was down to not having viable Champions League options. But some of that was also down to the fact that Saudi deal makers realized if they got Ronaldo, it would catalyze everything else. And then flash forwards, it's a lot easier to go if you're a player and you know 4 or 5 in the dressing room and you know that those 4 or 5 are of a higher standard. So it's much harder to get your first 5 or 10 big names. Once you get 5 or 10, it's a lot easier to get to 20 or 50 or 100. And that's the direction of travel where we're heading at the moment. So it's a fascinating project. And my knowledge of the Middle East and Saudi Arabia has definitely helped me get the inroads in order to cover transfer stories and human interest stories. I'll be going over to Saudi Arabia at least 4 or 5 times a year in order to cover some of the big matches.
Take me with you. I need to go.
Come over for sure. And I think that if people see the bigger games, the Al Hilals, the Al Ittihads, they'll really be taken aback by the passion and football culture there. We saw when Saudi Arabia beat Argentina in Qatar in their opening game, the kind of outpouring. Some people that have either seen videos or out there will have seen the Souk Waqif where Saudi fans were celebrating. And that's the same kind of spiritual football culture en masse that you will see at games as well, the bigger games anyway. So I think the Saudi League is here to stay. I think it's only going to grow from strength to strength. And let's see what summer 2024 in particular brings, because we might see an equally ambitious recruitment strategy that brings the likes of Mo Salah. They could try for Kevin De Bruyne. They might even try for Son at Spurs. They won't get every name, but one thing's for sure, they're not going to give up on trying to bring a bit of star power over to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's one of those situations that everyone... I explain it like this because I'm also a big supporter of the Saudi Pro League as well. I'm all for diversity in football across the world as well. And a lot of people are going, oh yeah, they went for the money. But I was like, actually, if you think about it like this, if all the money was in Denmark, for example, and for example, everyone wanted to go and play for Aalborg or FC Copenhagen or Brøndby as well, if all the money was there, everyone would go because they had the money there to actually go and play. And no one's going to go at the end of their career, oh yeah, let me go play for FC Copenhagen or Rosenborg in Norway, for example. They'll go where the attraction is. And the attraction at the end of a career, respectively, is looking like North America or Saudi Arabia at this moment in time. Because you've got the opportunities of a lavish lifestyle in the USA. You have a league where you're more of the bigger fish in a smaller pond. And I'm not talking about just Messi, I'm talking about other players previously who have gone there and then come back to Europe as well. Zlatan Ibrahimovic is a big example that he just didn't find it competitive enough and he didn't find the quality enough, but he really enjoyed the lifestyle. Then we've seen Cristiano Ronaldo obviously become a pioneer to go to Saudi Arabia, and it goes to show that from a personal point of view, I've liked the fact that when you're seeing players like N'Golo Kante and Sadio Mane who are obviously Muslim players, they've actually gone over and they've enjoyed the fact that they can actually have this generational wealth as well as enjoying the fruits of living in a Muslim country. I find that quite cool. But it's also benefited the Premier League and the European leagues, especially because it means that then each club then has to bring through more young players, and more young players then get chances because there's now a new catalyst in world football where they want to take some of the bigger players, some of the older players respectively. But it means that more players have chances to shine. I personally don't think Alejandro Garnacho would have had enough opportunities if Cristiano Ronaldo stayed for another 6 months at Manchester United, and it would have been one of those things that some people's developments don't improve. And I know there's talks of Jadon Sancho potentially going over to Saudi Arabia. I personally don't see it, but it's one of those things that more opportunities are out there for more players to develop. And it reminds me a lot about cricket in terms of the IPO when that first started in India. And then you had all the superstars going over there for big money contracts. But then India, again, I'm talking cricket as opposed to football, so bear with me. But India are looking like they're the real deal now in 50 over cricket, which is great because all of their young players that have grown up through the IPL are now fantastic white ball players. So yeah, if you got that, fantastic. If you didn't, don't worry about it. But that was just my analogy there as well. And I think that's going to happen with Saudi Arabia. It's just the start of how they're going to grow going forward, not just because of their league, but through their national team. That's how they're going to grow and how they're going to improve as well, which would be great. But yeah, I definitely want to work out in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar because it looks so cool to work out there. And like you said, the access looks a lot more comfortable out there as well, which would be great. But yeah, before we move on to our next topic, I just want to ask you a bit more about your boyhood club, Leicester City. So yeah, Leicester City are a team that are smashing it currently in the Championship, and they're looking like they're going to go straight back up, which is fantastic to see. I need to ask you on a personal note, when you were working, when you were working in England, respectively, when you were working at Leicester City, around Leicester City, how hard was it to get ahead of yourself that Leicester City could actually win the league back in 2015-16? And what was it like when you actually won the league as a Leicester City fan?
Yeah, I think I was covering it for beIN Sports at the time, so I had to be as neutral as I could possibly be. And
because everyone just sees Gary Lineker's reaction, but I know that you're a Leicester City fan, so I needed to hear this as well. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was one of those seasons where everything that could go right for Leicester did go right for Leicester, which is strange because the off-season couldn't have started with more drama. Nigel Pearson had left the club and Leicester had this great escape the season before, and that momentum was really important. And then Claudio Ranieri came in. He was largely derided. Leicester got off to a good start. One thing that Ranieri did, I think, that was very beneficial was that he moved to a 4-4-2 and he encouraged Riyad Mahrez to kind of cut inside more. And Mahrez got his goal scoring going. He got a partnership with Jamie Vardy, and the rest is kind of history in many ways. But there were so many other players that contributed. Danny Drinkwater, another one that had a great season, and N'Golo Kante, outstanding, perhaps the best player for Leicester during that season. And then at the back, the likes of the captain, Wes Morgan or Robert Huth, all hugely underrated in some respects. Kasper Schmeichel, another good example, although he got a few more plaudits, I think, than maybe a Huth or a Morgan. But they barely had any injuries. They were able to pick a consistent 11. They were a tremendous counter-attacking team. And I think when we got halfway through the season, I started to think Champions League might be possible. It wasn't really until a few months later, after the festive period, that I really thought, okay, we're going to do this. And a lot of Leicester fans look to the away victory at Man City, where Robert Huth scored twice, as the game when they suddenly decided Leicester can do this. If we win away at Man City, if Robert Huth, of all people, can score a couple of goals in the rain, then Leicester are going to win the Premier League. But bizarrely for me, it was a loss, not a win, when I thought Leicester were going to win the Premier League. It was the game one against Arsenal, yeah. And the reason for that was because Danny Simpson got sent off and Leicester hung on, and Leicester played well, and Leicester showed resilience, and Leicester dug in. And yeah, they lost the game in the last minute, but I sort of came away from that watching Arsenal's celebrations as if they'd won the league.
Danny
And I
Welbeck
thought,
got them gassed. That's all I'm saying. He was.
yeah,
I've never seen celebrations like that at the Emirates in any game, which is crazy to think about.
exactly. They celebrated like they won the title. And I thought, hang on a minute,
Literally.
Leicester are going to leave here gutted, but they're also going to think we've gone toe to toe in a game everyone expected us to lose with 10 men, and we've nearly got a point. And that made me think they're not going to wobble. They're going to hang on. And then before the famous Hazard goal for Chelsea against Spurs, even though it was a bit more obvious at that point that Leicester had it in their control and were going to win it, there was a draw against Manchester United at Old Trafford as well, when Wes Morgan scored. And many Leicester fans travelled up, and many Leicester fans did what Arsenal did, and they celebrated like they'd won the Premier League in that game, because that was a really good point for Leicester as well. So I think those were the two games for me. Like, yes, the win over Man City was significant too, but I think the loss before it to Arsenal and the Manchester United draw were the two games in that season that really stood out to me as memorable and pivotal in many ways in the season. Because if you have that blip against Arsenal and bounce back, then it becomes significant. And sometimes you need that bit of adversity. Sometimes you need that moment within a season where it doesn't go your way. And, you know, that Arsenal loss came straight after that Man City win. So basically you're in, I think it was early February, you've just beaten Man City and they'd beaten Liverpool, by the way, before that as well. And everyone says Leicester are motoring. You lose to Arsenal, they celebrate like they've won the title, and everybody says Leicester are going to be absolutely screwed at this point. They didn't lose another game all season after that. And that tells you everything. There was another key period in March, I suppose, where they were kind of grinding out 1-0s that were a bit less convincing. I remember they won away at Watford. They won at home to Newcastle. They won away at Palace. They won, I think it was against Southampton. And all of them were like cagey. They were 1-0 wins. So you started to think in that March period as well, they're just digging in. They're finding a way. It's not pretty. They're not scoring as many goals as they did in the earlier part of the season, but they're finding a way to win. So that was a key period. But yeah, the only time Leicester lost in 2016 in the league was that Arsenal game. And yet, bizarrely, that was the point when I was most confident that they would win the Premier League.
Yeah, it's one of those situations that adversity brings character. And that's literally the character that Claudio Ranieri's spoken about ever since he's left as well. And it goes to show that Leicester City still had a lot of that character going forward a couple seasons. But again, that's kind of when the magic happened at the end of May, when you won the league, which was incredible to see and must have been fantastic. I remember going into the city, I think 2 days before you won the league, and it was just buzzing everywhere. And it's crazy to see as well how Leicester City have gone from there as well, winning an FA Cup as well against Chelsea. Yuri Tielemans, amazing goal in the cup final as well. But yeah, one more question on Leicester City. Currently, right now in the Championship, are there any key players that we should watch out for this season in the Championship for Leicester City, and why, really? Like, Kieran Dewsbury-Hall seems to be having a decent season so far, but is there anyone that we're missing that we think, you know what, we should keep an eye on them going forward this season?
Yeah, I mean, Leicester have got an excellent squad for the Championship. Harry Winks was an inspired signing. Spurs fans will obviously know him, but at that level, I think that he's absolutely brilliant. I think the player that people should watch out for in the future, but unfortunately he's picked up an injury now, but he made a blinding stats the season, is Casey McAteer. And Leicester's relegation benefited McAteer because it's given him these opportunities in the Championship. He's actually been at the football club since 2021. He made one Premier League appearance in 2021-22 and then didn't play at all last season. And maybe had he done so, Leicester would have stayed up, but he was a bit younger. Now he's got his opportunity. And prior to picking up an injury, he played 7 games in the Championship and scored 4 goals. And the other goal came at Anfield in the League Cup. So a lot was made of Leicester losing James Maddison to Spurs, losing Harvey Barnes, who's also injured now, to Newcastle. But I think that Casey McAteer is the player that I think has a big future as far as Leicester are concerned. And when he returns from injury, I think that he is going to be one to watch and highly, highly significant. Obviously, within the Leicester squad, there's plenty of other players. Dewsbury-Hall is one. You've mentioned him quite rightly. I think that might not be for Leicester, might be for Chelsea because he's only on loan, but Cesar Casadei has been an important part for Leicester. And the last name that I would mention, again, a known name, but is not been at his best because he was injured. Let's not forget, playing at fullback for Leicester is Ricardo, who a few seasons ago, before he had a long-term injury, was one of the best fullbacks in the Premier League. And I think that if he stays fit and has a positive season in the Championship and Leicester go up, then he is going to return to the top flight and be highly significant to Leicester as well.
Yeah, a few seasons ago as well, he was challenging João Cancelo and Diogo Dalot for that first choice right back position in the Portuguese national squad as well. So lots to come from Leicester City this season as well, which is great. Nicely done there, Ben. But yeah, two more topics before we wrap up today. I'm going to go for the more tricky one. I mean, we're talking about Ballon d'Or 2023. It could be, again, Lionel Messi's next Ballon d'Or to win as well. People are debating if it should be Erling Haaland. There's rumours already that it's going to be Lionel Messi. But I did challenge you beforehand, Ben, being a football journalist. I wanted your opinion on the best 11 for 2023. So I'll let you start with this one, and I want to hear your thoughts on who should be in the starting 11 for the World 11 for 2023.
Yeah, it's always going to create contention, isn't it? And as you say, I think that it's categorically clear that Ballon d'Or wise, it will be Messi or Haaland, and then Bellingham has had an incredible end to the year, but in some ways too little too late, because the way the voting works is that they say it's a Ballon d'Or for a year, but they're really factoring in things like last season and the World Cup. So
which was in 2022.
Yeah, I know, but it's just how it works, isn't it? You know, what the Bellingham stats will do at the moment is put him significantly in contention for the Ballon d'Or in 2024, which, as you say, is ironic because he's currently in 2023 and doing it. And I think he's the best player in Europe at the moment. So my best 11 factors in the World Cup for 2023 as well, breaking that rule. But that is just how these things work. It's kind of in a 4-3-3, but I'm torn on one position. And
I'll help you out with it. That'll be good fun.
But yeah, goalkeeper is maybe my most contentious one because I've actually given it to Yassine Bono.
Ooh, I like that shout.
And I know a lot of people will have other goalkeepers that they feel are above him.
I mean, Yassine Bono was the Europa League winner last season for Sevilla.
Exactly.
He moved to the Saudi League on deadline day as well. And obviously the semi-finalist for Morocco in the 2022 World Cup. So he had a fantastic season last season as well, and a really good 2023. So nice shout there.
Some will make an argument for Onana, but I can't get the Manchester United form, the penalty save aside against Copenhagen. I can't get that out of my head. So this is the problem when you do 2023. On the one hand, I'm saying I'm going back to 2022 and that Bellingham's discounted as far as Ballon d'Or is concerned. On the other hand, I'm saying Onana's in my head as being shaky at the moment rather than looking at getting to a Champions League final with Inter. But Bono's my goalkeeper. And then I would like Saliba, Diaz and Kim. But if I'm putting it in a formation, then I have to probably go with Hakimi instead as one fullback. And then Vardiol, I'm going to be using a little unnaturally. Well, not unnaturally, but I'm going to be using him on the left side. Okay. And that means that one of my centre-backs misses out. So I'm going to go with Diaz and Saliba. And that means that Kim, who had a great season for Napoli prior to moving, is not in that side, but it's more of a back four.
Yeah.
Midfield, there's no De Bruyne.
Why not? Because he was injured in the final.
Yeah, but also I need Rodri in there.
Okay.
And I feel like once Rodri's in there, it's Bellingham for sure. So I've only got one more midfielder, and here's where I cheat a little bit because he could be in a front three, but I'm putting Kvaratskhelia in a midfield position, a wide
out of position.
Midfield position.
That's crazy out of position as well. Napoli was killing it on the left wing last season, but this season has been slow to start as well, respectively. I'm missing that penalty against AC Milan, I think, in the Champions League, which is a very big defining moment for him last season. But obviously winning the league for Napoli, that was crazy. The first win for Napoli in 30 years of the Scudetto. So I like that he's in your team, but I don't like that left centre mid position.
Yeah, I mean, it should probably just be 3 straight midfielders, and De Bruyne comes in there. But De Bruyne, Bellingham, Rodri, still some positional issues there as well. But that might be the more popular thing. But I want to get Kvaratskhelia in there. I think he deserves credit. So me as manager would be redefining him as a kind of attacking midfielder. And then obviously I have to have Messi and Haaland. And that's the problem when you're looking at a formation. I suppose you could say it could be Messi and Haaland and Kvaratskhelia with De Bruyne behind. But think who I'm leaving out then. And this was the other debate for me in my front three. I've got Messi and Haaland, and then I just cannot pick between Osimhen and Kane, who I think are both really worthy.
You may as well play 4-4-2, no, 4-2-4 then, I would say. Or 4-2-2-2 could be.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is the thing, formation-wise, if we're allowed to, then we could say Kvaratskhelia is actually a forward, and then I have to pick between Osimhen and Kane. So it's just a 2-man midfield of Rodri and Bellingham. If I was being really critical, and this is what I mean about help me with the formation, I would actually say I'm going to ditch Hakimi. I'm going to have Diaz, Saliba, and Gvardiol, and that buys me an extra midfielder for De Bruyne, and then I can still have 4 up front. But then I'm nuts, because then it's a 3-3-4 formation, which is going to cause all manner of defensive problems. So it depends.
Play something similar as well at Man City, so you're not too far off.
Yeah, I was trying to be as accurate as I could to a team I thought could play in a traditional formation, rather than just chuck in a collection of names. But yeah, I mean, look, in how I've got it, we could say it's only Rodri and Bellingham in midfield, and then Kvaratskhelia is in a 4-2-4. I'm happy with that. And then it's Haaland and Messi, and then I have to pick between Osimhen and Kane. And because Kvaratskhelia is in there, and has the partnership with Osimhen, I'm going to say Osimhen, because Napoli...
Thank you.
An incredible Scudetto, and Kane is going to have to make do with a place on the bench.
It's 12th man if we're using cricket terms as well. He would have been in there, but he wasn't. Nah, I'm glad.
But also, the other thing with Kane is, 30 Premier League goals, but where did Spurs finish in the league?
He can only do so much as well, and now he's hopefully going to get his just rewards at Bayern Munich as well, respectively. But contentious team. I do like it. I like your reasons for a lot of teams as well. A lot of players in there as well, which is great to see, which is really good. But yeah, Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia had to make that team for me, because they were outrageous last season, which was fantastic. And obviously, I like the World Cup element of Bono, Hakimi, and Lionel Messi, of course, which was fantastic to really see as well. Nicely done there, Ben. But yeah, before we wrap up, I've got one more question to ask you. And it is a fun one. Name your 3 favorite moments in your footballing media career, and why. Because you've had loads. You've had absolutely loads, and we could have done a whole podcast on it, but time is of the essence here, Ben, I know. So 3 favorite footballing media career moments. Yeah,
3 favorite moments. Okay, moment number 1 is climbing Kilimanjaro to film the highest altitude football match, which was a documentary I made for beIN Sports called Equal Playing Field. It was 60 odd footballers, of which at least 25 were professional female ones. And they basically wanted to reach the summit and use the platform and the exposure of the event to promote gender equality in sport. And we climbed for 9 days. We built a FIFA-approved football field.
Nice.
Because everything had to be done according to regulation. And, as a journalist, you're not always a part of the story. But obviously, to facilitate this, we had to climb it. We had to camp with them. We had to spend 24/7 with the players. So you really felt a part of it. And it was also very worthwhile to come out with an end product that helped maximize the message. So that was my favorite moment in journalism, because I was just really enthused by creating something that meant something, and helping these really inspirational women break a world record. So that was number 1. Number 2 was playing five-a-side football with Diego Maradona in Dubai. And it just came about so randomly. He was managing Al Wasl. He was often a visible presence out there. We had a five-a-side team. Freddie Canute used to come and play sometimes as well.
West Ham legend, Spurs legend as well. I'm gassed up Canute more than Maradona, but I know the Maradona story. But tell the listeners about the competition you beat Diego Maradona in as well.
Yeah, I mean, so he was there, Maradona. He rocked up randomly. We were a player short. We saw him. We didn't think that he would want to play. We asked him out of the blue. We had somebody, luckily, that spoke a bit of Spanish. He was like, yeah, I'd be absolutely delighted to play. So out of nowhere, he's joining in and he's on our team. And
was he still the GOAT? Was he still legit?
Oh, I mean, yeah, especially at five-a-side, because you can shoot from anywhere. So the power and the skills that he's got were incredible. But basically, he afterwards started like showing some skills, and there was some free kicks and some penalties, and we did like a kick-up challenge. And somehow I beat him at that kick-up challenge, because kick-ups is about the only thing that I can do in football.
Nicely done.
That was kind of fun. And then one of my other favorite moments was breaking an exclusive on Rafa Benitez joining Chelsea, because it was a highly contentious story. And a lot of people thought that there wouldn't be any substance to it, because he'd said when he was at Liverpool some very negative comments about Chelsea. And as we know from history, it was not a popular appointment, even though I think he did well there.
Won the Europa League as well.
But I was in Dubai, and I got a call at about midnight in Dubai telling me that Rafa Benitez hadn't left Dubai, where Abu Dhabi, in fact, where he was there for an engagement. And instead of flying out of Abu Dhabi, he had driven down to Dubai to wait for confirmation from Chelsea that they would be offering him the job. And he was literally waiting for a phone call from Roman Abramovich, and he wasn't getting on a flight. He obviously wasn't intending to go back to England. So he was waiting to find out whether he would fly direct from Dubai instead of out of Abu Dhabi, to basically go and sign a contract at Stamford Bridge. And there was all kinds of speculation at the time. And he was there with his agent. I got a call at midnight saying he was in this bar in Dubai watching, I think it was Manchester City, maybe against Real Madrid in the Champions League. And I thought it was a bit of a hoax to begin with, but it was a trusted source. And they basically said, if you go down there, you'll spot him, you'll be able to film him, you can probably speak to him, and you can confirm this story and you can break this story. So I was in bed, and I got out of bed, went down to this bar, and true to the word of my source, Rafa Benitez was there. And I went up to him and I started talking to him. He couldn't say that much at the time. And then his phone rang. And not that you should ever pry and look at somebody's phone, but, you know, you just sometimes see someone scream. Yeah. And when the phone rang, I realized it was Roman Abramovich. And he went outside and he took a call, and came back in. He didn't give too much away. But obviously, I'm digging around with other sources as well, and I'm telling my Chelsea story. My Chelsea sources, so they're obviously aware that, look, I'm with Benitez as well here. And eventually, I get confirmation that he's joining, and I'm able to break that story. So it's just sort of a good example to any young journalist of sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. Sometimes the story hits you out of nowhere, and it's how you react and it's how you stand it up. And I had to be quite patient with that, because Benitez didn't really want to give anything away. And they didn't want to announce it until the day afterwards to anybody. So I don't think I was the agent's best friend. But afterwards, the agent sort of said, you know, fair play, because they respect the fact that as a journalist, if you do that kind of thing, you get your story. And sometimes you have to camp out places. Sometimes you have to be patient. Sometimes you have to wait for things. But it ended up getting announced, which was the fun part. Because they knew I'd gotten wind of it. They knew that other people would get wind of it after I got wind of it. So instead of being announced the next day when he'd signed and when he was in England, they had to announce it at the end of that Champions League game. So suddenly, out of nowhere, Benitez is verbally accepted. And it flashes up on the TV channel that Benitez has been officially announced. And he's still there in this bar. And there's like a massive cheer in the bar. So it all happened very quickly. And, you know, it's not exclusively because of me getting that story, but it clearly escalated the announcement because there's a journalist in the bar. There's a journalist right in front of Benitez. So I love those kind of stories because you have to throw yourself in, you have to react in the moment. And that's one of my favorite moments in journalism as well.
Nicely done there. I personally would have thought you'd have gone for something regarding Leicester City, but that was a story I've not heard before with Rafa Benitez. So nicely done there, Ben. But yeah, thank you very much for your time today, Ben. It's been great to have you on. Hopefully, we'll get a part 2 later down the season, which would be great to have you back on and more stories to hear from you as well. And a lot more that I've got to ask you as well, which would be great. But where can everyone find you this season and what have you got planned for the season before we wrap up this week's podcast?
Yeah, I can be found at Jacobs Ben on Twitter. I can be heard on CBS covering Premier League and the Saudi Pro League. And I am doing a range of other things, including a podcast that I host with Fabrizio Romano on Caught Offside. So
Nice.
Lots of things upcoming throughout the season and look forward to engaging with everybody. And thanks for having me on.
No, you're very welcome. If you want to have part 2 with Fabrizio Romano, just let me know. I'd love to have him on as well with you. Just having 2 amazing journalists in world football, respectively, which would be great. But everyone, thank you very much for your time, for listening. Everyone, do follow Ben on his social medias, which we'll leave in the description below. Have a lovely week, and we will see you next time. Ben, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.